In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Would you please be seated? Those of you who've been here at Christchurch for a little while will probably have picked up that Christchurch has a lot of traditions. There are a lot of unique things we do here, and I love them. One in particular that's a favourite of mine is some of these changes that we make to our liturgy during Lent. You'll no doubt have noticed some of them already. We have these and thous, the Gloria is gone, the A word, Alleluia, is not said for a little while. But for me, I think my favourite of these changes is the replacement of a processional hymn with that chanted recitation of the Ten Commandments. For as significant a piece of our faith as these commandments are, honestly, how often do we actually hear them rehearsed or taught on at church? Indeed, it was not that long ago that I'm pretty sure one could safely assume most Bible-believing, church-going Christians could recite these from memory. I wonder how much that remains the case now. The commandments provide us with the foundation of the moral and spiritual life, divided into two sets, injunctions about the ways in which we are to shape our relationships with God and with one another. These pillars of the law of Moses remain binding for Christians and act something as the framework within which the rest of our lives of discipleship, spiritually, morally, theologically, relationally, are to develop. In short, if we don't get these right, getting the rest of it, the Christian life, right, is a tall order. Accordingly, I thought I'd take this opportunity to spend some time pondering and unpacking this with you. However, rather than just giving each one a cursory glance, or alternatively turning the sermon into a 2-hour affair where we can properly spend time delving into each. Actually, is there a show of hands if anyone wants that? No? Okay, I didn't think so. Instead, I thought I'd focus on just one. The one which I'd hazard a guess tends to receive less attention, because when taken seriously, it risks making us rather uncomfortable. Get ready. Remember that thou keep holy the Sabbath day. Remember that thou keep holy the Sabbath day. You know, before I moved here, one of the most common things told to me by American friends, by the internet, was that moving to the South, I was going to move into a slower pace of life. That everything's just a little more laid back, that things tend to move at a gentler pace. Well, while indeed many folks in the South probably don't speak at as breakneck a speed as I do, and with apologies again for my bizarre accent, goodness me, they sure do life just as fast. How fast our lives tend to run. How profoundly busy most of you are. How easy to become so good, by necessity, at multitasking, answering work emails with one hand, replying to that mountain of texts with the other, and simultaneously planning this evening's dinner, reminding myself to go back to the gym, replaying something embarrassing I did 5 years ago, rearranging and stressing about budgets, strategizing at the next meeting I need to walk into, trying to get on top of that unfinished pile of work from last week, and also trying to get a head start for next week, and also feeling guilty about not cramming in time to see friends. All of this and more at breakneck speed. Goodness knows, Sabbath at that point surely seems like a luxury at best, and an unnecessary inconvenience at worst. Indeed, to live in America in the 21st century is to become deeply familiar with hearing how busy other people are. and telling people how busy we are. Isn't that the default response when we ask someone how they're doing? Busy, so busy, crazy busy. And yet, I think we all know that behind that stressed tone with which this response is normally conveyed, how often it's the case that this complaint is, in reality, a thinly veiled boast. And don't we play into that too, sometimes, replying with a bizarre word of congratulation? Oh, you're busy? Well, that's a good problem to have. Or better than the opposite. Perhaps, deep down, we recognize that more often than not, this lamented busyness is largely self-imposed. Work, obligations, and a lifestyle one has taken on voluntarily. Classes and activities one has encouraged one's children to participate in. How often, indeed, that those who so lament their busyness are busy because of their own ambition, or drive, or anxiety. How often that this addiction to busyness, consciously or otherwise, is an addiction born of a dread of what one might have to face in its absence. And here, as a number of uncomfortable looks in the room are proving, we begin to touch on the root of the issue. An issue which we shall see the Christian faith responds to strongly. Now, if we're to speak seriously about this cultural idol of busyness, this antithesis of Sabbath, I think it's important that we first recognize that many of us actually are really, really busy. I can think off the top of my head of 30 people here that I'm looking at, and doubtless more, who are spread razor thin, fulfilling the necessary obligations of life, tending to jobs, families, and children, addressing the infinite list of errands and to-dos, scheduling time for exercise, friends, entertainment, bills, volunteer work. The list goes on endlessly. Almost everyone I know is overly busy. How easy to feel anxious and guilty when one isn't working or doing something to promote one's work. How easy to schedule in time with friends the way students with 4.0 GPAs make sure to sign up for community service because it looks good on a college application. Even children are busy now, scheduled down to the half hour with classes and extracurriculars, coming home at the end of the day just as tired as their parents and likely with hours of nighttime homework ahead of them. But for as important as it is to acknowledge this broadly shared reality, so too, I think, must we acknowledge, albeit perhaps uncomfortably, that what we might call this present hysteria of busyness is not a necessary or inevitable condition of life. It's something we've chosen, if only by our collective acquiescence to it. Now, it's not as if anyone wants to live that way, really, any more than any one person wants to be part of a traffic jam. It's something which collectively we tend to enable and even encourage one another in doing and being. Yet, by the same token, staying in that place of extraordinary busyness does have a certain appeal, one which I, at least, can be very tempted by. And it's this: that this busyness, as sold by the culture around us, can quite helpfully serve as a kind of existential reassurance, a hedge against the fear of emptiness. Of course my life has meaning and worth, goes the justification. Just look at how busy, completely booked, in demand I am. Indeed, how easy to end up enjoying the complaint, I'm too busy, which reassures me that I am important, or sought after, or put upon. How easy to base my value on my output. my identity and self-regard on the quality and efficiency of my work. This is surely one of the great and unremitting sins of the legacy of late-stage capitalism and the Protestant work ethic. And it's precisely against this cultural idol and its associated framework by which we are told to measure ourselves that the divine command to not only observe but embrace and inhabit Sabbath speaks now. If we look back through the scriptures, we find that injunction to Sabbath observance run as a persistent leitmotif, a persistent theme throughout. From its institution at creation to its adoption and translation by the early church, we find that call to stop and be in rest with the Lord. That call to simply spend time with him, not as another chore to be multitasked away and ticked off the to-do list, but as an invitation to accept with single-minded intentionality. This we find to be central to the Christian vocation. And knowing that our tendency will be always to prioritize other things, God makes it a command. And if we trace through the scriptures the times this has been ignored, the times the people of God lost what we might call a Sabbath consciousness, a way of being in the world oriented to the Sabbath, we find disaster. For we find a people who have forgotten how to spend time with their God, forgotten how to stop and rest and listen, forgotten that he is the gauge by which they find their worth, and not a false metric sold them by another. How easy it is to do the same now, and in response to the God who constantly calls, "Remember me," end up forgetting him by not spending time with him because of the busyness I have chosen to fall into. And this cult of busyness in the world around me will tell me that without it, without being able to point to an impressive list of endless activity, I risk a life of little or no value. In the face of this, our faith declares proudly the inestimable worth of every human life, not because of what it does, or even has the potential to do, but simply because it is made in the image and likeness of God. We are valuable and of infinite worth because God says we are, with words that form reality and reveal truth. The rupture, as it were, that then occurs within our souls is when that subtle lie starts to creep in, the one that dictates that my actions make me worthy, that what I do makes me lovable in the eyes of God, that I can rely on my actions to provide an existential reassurance that I am of worth. This is the lie spoken by the idol of busyness. Indeed, it would seem that contrary to the old adage, idleness isn't only the playground on which the devil enjoys playing, he's quite fond of its opposite as well. Now, in all this, it goes without saying, I hope, that we are called to act. Our actions help reveal who we are, and as human beings gifted with reason, with talents, with desires, with a noble vocation to build up and spread God's kingdom, we must do so through action. Yet, contrary to what we are told so often, our actions, what we do, are not the determining factors of who we are. In his wonderful series of essays, No Man is an Island, Thomas Merton writes, "In order to settle down in the quiet of our own being, we must learn to be detached from the results of our own activity. The fact that our human nature demands to be expressed in action should not lead us to believe that as soon as we stop acting, doing something, we cease to be. We do not live merely in order to do something, no matter what. We do not live fully by doing more, seeing more, tasting more, experiencing more than we ever have before. On the contrary, Merton writes, some of us need to discover that we will not live more fully until we have the courage to do and see and taste and experience much less than usual. How easy to fall into the trap of relying on what I do to validate my worth in God's eyes. And just as I falsely assumed I'm more lovable because of certain things I've done, I've also done the opposite and labeled myself necessarily unworthy of God's love because of a failure to do certain other things. And in this, the busyness of our work, even very good work, ends up leading to an emptying of our true selves because we become confused, bereft of the ability to understand who we are. If we fail to see that we are not what we do, then our good acts become emptied of love and become an attempt to win God's favor, rather than simply express our love for him in others. It's dangerous to idolize a life rife with activity. I have to keep reminding myself that no matter what I do, no matter how good or noble the action, it should always be done as a response to God's love and not as a plea for it. And it is all of this that the Sabbath reminds us of. For the Sabbath proclaims that the Christian is a royal child of God, called to rest with the King, who in the space of quiet and still reminds me that it is there, in that identity alone, that I find and know my worth. Each one of us is indeed a lot of things, but none of them is who we are in the deepest sense. The only thing that matters is that you are a child of God, made by God for God's purposes and destined to live with him in eternity. The Sabbath is the space in which we are called to remember this intentionally. In eternity, our titles fade away, our earthly successes and failures, and we know ourselves simply as children of God. Sabbath is the persistent call to do that now. And in all of this, the call goes further and points us to see the Sabbath as a day for the sake of life. That the Sabbath is not simply a rest in order to get back to work, but that the point of our work is in order to get us to that place of rest with God. Sabbath is the terminus. Rest is the end. It is certainly not work. Rest in peace, we declare when people die, not work in peace. It is to the place of rest that we entrust ourselves as Christians for eternity. It'd be a shame if we didn't get to know how to do that on this side of it. One final thought. Love has a speed. When we talk about God, we talk about the one who the Bible declares is love. When we talk of the incarnation, we talk of the God who is love becoming flesh. And the average human walks at about 3 miles an hour. Love moves slow. The Lord moves at about 3 miles an hour. Don't try to outrun him. Love has a speed. That speed is slow and gentle and tender. And this very notion challenges the idea that God is primarily interested in speed, productivity, and efficiency. The Lord through whom the universe was made, the God who threw the stars into the heavens, is a God who takes his time and walks at 3 miles an hour. And so, dear friends, for the love of God and for the love of yourselves, have the courage to rest